Let's do it. Let's add a custom mob to Minecraft. More in-depth topics for Minecraft modding available in the 121 modding courses linked below, covering writable and tameable entities, custom entity armor, and even custom entity inventories, among many more awesome topics. Alright, friends, we're back in Intelligent once more, and in this tutorial, we're beginning adding a custom mob, or as it's called inside of the code, a custom entity to our Minecraft mod. Now, this is going to be, listen. It's going to be absolutely amazing. It's going to be really cool. But as you can already clearly tell by the length of the video, it is a very, very involved process because there are just like a lot of different things to do. And I want you to understand what we're doing over here and not just strictly copy over. Now, there's going to be a bunch of copying as well. That's basically inevitable in this case. But hopefully after this, you're going to have the custom entity or the custom mob added to your mod, and then this will allow you to then add more custom ones in the future. So what is the mob we're going to add? Now we're going to add the Triceratops right here. Really freaking cool. And this is basically going to be also available to you. So the Blockbench file is going to be available to you. Both of the different textures here will be available to you, including the animation over here, because we have like different animations. There's an idle animation over here. There is a walking animation, just a basic one. And there's even an attack animation, although we will not add any attacks. But in theory, you could add this on your own time as well. We're going to deal with this in a second. First of all, in the Blockbench file itself, when you have this open, of course, you need Blockbench for this. This is the program that we're using for the 3D model. And what you want here is to go to File under Plugins. You want to make sure that you have the animation to Java converter over here. Yep, as the thing, even though it is deprecated, still fine. We need to change like one or two things when we export our animation, but that's going to be okay. We don't need to worry about that too much. And then when you have this, well, then we want to go to File Project, very importantly, and we want to make sure that the export version over here is set to Forge 1.17 plus Moj maps. Otherwise, we have issues when we export this stuff. So we want to make sure that this is the case, confirm, and then we can go to File, Export, Export Java Entity. Now this goes right here. We're going to call this the Triceratops model.java. That's going to be awesome. And then what we can do is go to File again, and we want to go to Export Animations to Java. Here we want to choose the Mojang mappings, confirm, and then the same thing here goes. This is the Triceratops. This is anims, so we can just call this Triceratops anims. This will be saved in a text file. So those are the two, text files. So one Java file, which is going to be the model itself, so this 3D representation, but inside of Java code, and the animations, which were these different animations over here that we have basically exported. The last thing to export is the textures over here. For that, we basically just want to right-click the texture, save as. This is Triceratops_gray.png. We're going to save this, and the same thing goes for the green one over here. Even though we're not using it right now, we're still going to right-click, save as. And the same thing, Triceratops_green.png, and there we have it. And those are the 4 files we need to export from the Blockbench file, and then we could proceed and actually add all of this stuff into our mod over here. So this is going to be quite interesting indeed. Instead of the Kaupenjoe tutorial mod package, we're going to right click new package called entity. And then here, there's going to be a bunch of different things. The first thing is a new package called custom. We want another package inside of the entity package called client, and then the different classes start. We're going to start inside of the entity package itself, right click new Java class called the mod entities. This is of course for registration of the entity. And then in entity custom, we're going to make a new Java class called the Triceratops entity. Now do note that obviously you want to make sure that Triceratops is written correctly every time. It's a very easy thing to make a typo there, which is why you should double, triple, quadruple check everything. If there, for example, is something wrong, like something does not work, of course, you have the code available down below in the GitHub repository. That's number 1. And number 2, it is super easy to make a typo. So just keep that in mind. Now here with the entity, we're going to have this extends from the animal class over here. There we go. And we'll hover over this to implement the 2 methods we need. We'll hover over this again, create constructor matching super. And the first thing here is to make the constructor public. And then we need 2 fields. Now these 2 fields will be needed specifically for the animation. So we're going to make a public final animation state. It's going to be called the idle animation state, which is going to be equal to a new animation state. All right, fair enough. And then we also have a private integer, private int idle animation timeout, which is going to be set or equal to 0 here in this case. Now, these two are needed in order for us to properly add the animations. And here I want to give another nod to some Java knowledge, because if you have, so let's say intermediate level Java knowledge or above, just press Shift twice and, for example, look at the camel. So we're going to put in camel over here, include non-project items. And if I were to go into the camel, you would see a very interesting thing. Idle animation state. We have a idle animation timeout. It is almost as if vanilla and the code for vanilla has like almost everything available to you. Basically, most of what we're going to see in the coming tutorials when it comes to the entities, it's pretty much all gotten from vanilla with obviously like as inspiration, right? Yeah, that's basically one more time for the appeal to maybe think about going into Java just a little bit more in order for you to understand everything. Now, continuing along with the entity. What does an entity need? Well, we're going to need a couple of things. We're going to do the isFood and getBreedOffspring methods in a second, but first we wanted to override the register goals method. Now, this one is super interesting and super important because this basically determines what the behavior of your custom entity is going to be. So idea is that what are we going to do when certain things happen? And this is going to work like this. Inside of the register goals method, we're going to say this.goalSelector.add goal. Then we need to add a priority where 0 is basically the highest priority. Any goal that would be executed, the lower the number of the priority, then it would get executed sooner. That's the idea. Now, the goal with the highest priority should be a float goal passing in this. Now, the reason why is because if your entity ever finds itself inside of water and you do not have the float goal, it is going to sink to the bottom and simply drown, which usually is not a good idea. So we have this, and we're just going to copy over the rest of the goals. Like I said, all of the code is available to you down below, so you can check it there. We're going to take a look at all of the different goals. What do they mean? The panic goal is executed when, for example, you hit this entity and then it runs around in a little bit of a higher speed. The breed goal basically simply means that this particular entity can breed with another one of its kind, right? Breed goal, right? They're going to breed. Then you have a tempt goal, which basically is if I have a kohlrabi in my hand, then it's going to follow me. Interesting. That is pretty cool. We also have the follow parent goal. I don't think I need to add any description to this. There's the water avoiding random stroll goal, kind of similar to this. It's just going to walk around while avoiding water. Look at player goal. I think this also should be more or less self-explanatory as what it does. It's just going to look at the player, and then the randomly look around goal. I think the name describes what this does. So the goal system is only one of the different behavior/AI systems that Minecraft basically has. I think there's like 3 different ones. The goal one is let's say the old one. Then there's the brains, which I think the villagers depend on. And then there's like another one that's like sort of a hybrid, and it's all sorts of weird. But in the terms of the goals, if you want to add other goals, you can absolutely do that. You can control left click on this, or sometimes middle mouse button click also works to enter into the class. And then here you have the goal, as you can see, and I can click on this and press Control H. And all of a sudden, if I were to expand this, we have every single goal that exists in vanilla. You have almost everything that you ever could use or want or need right in front of you right here. And if this is not the case, then you can always go to GitHub repositories of other mods and look at it there. This, of course, once again, presumes that you have Java knowledge to a certain degree in order to understand what the frick is even happening with these goals, because some of them, let me actually double check. Which ones would be like really complicated? I don't think that any of these are quite as complicated as you would think. I think like an attack goal could be a little bit more complicated, but even those are not that bad. But yes, that is basically the idea, and that is goals. So every entity needs goals, and this is basically how you would add them. Next thing would be a public static. This is going to be an attribute supplier.builder. And this is going to be the create attributes method, which is going to return the following. It's going to return animal.create living attributes. And then we want to add a couple of attributes as well, which is going to be the max health, first of all. Let's do for the Triceratops like a 30, something like that, I think. Then we want to add attributes dot movement speed. I think that's going to be a good idea. Let's do a, 3.35, I think. And then lastly, the follow range. Can I do this? No, I can't. I do have to put in attributes.follow range, and the follow range is going to be 24 blocks over here. So idea being, any type of entity, of course, has some attributes like max health, like movement speed. And we can go into the attributes class itself and look at some other things. Luck, there's jump strength, flying speed, all sorts of different attributes that we could add to our entity over here. And some of them are needed. So for example, the follow range over here is needed, I believe, because we have the follow parent goal, and also because it's an animal, I think that is just simply needed. And you need attributes. Otherwise, like the actual entity, when you try to spawn it, will not spawn. So keep that in mind. Next point of order is the food. What is going to be put in here? Well, we're just going to say return pstack.is mod items.kohlrabi.get. And the idea here is that if I right click a Triceratops with a kohlrabi, it is going to go into breed mode. And if I have two of them, then simply like the similar way, or the same way basically, when you right click a cow with wheat, then they both, if you do two of them, then they both get an offspring over here. That's the same idea. Now in the get breed offspring method, we want to actually make a deliberate error, because we can only return a new one of our Triceratops entities over here properly once we have registered it. But that's going to be okay. The last two things we're going to need in the entity class for this particular tutorial is going to be for the animations. So now we basically finished the stuff with the animations, and for this we want a private void, and this is going to be the setup animation states method. Here we're going to have an if statement where we're going to ask if the idle animation timeout is smaller or equal to 0, then we're going to do something, and else we're going to do something else. So in the else statement, we can actually do that first. We're going to say minus this idle animation timeout. So that means that the idle animation timeout is going to be subtracted by 1 every time this particular method is called. And of course, at some point, it's going to be 0 or lower than 0. So then what we're doing is fairly simple. We're resetting the timeout, in this case, to 80. I don't think 80 is actually correct. We can double check, because this number over here should be the number of ticks that your idle animation plays for. So we can go into the animate tab over here, idle, and we can see it actually plays for 2 seconds, and it should actually loop as well. So it should actually be a perfect loop. And as you can see, it is a perfect loop. So that means that here we actually want 40 ticks. Now I think 80 would actually be fine, because it's perfectly divisible by it. So it should still be properly looping, but in this case, we're going to be okay. We're going to do 40. And then when this is the case, we're going to say this.idle animation state.start this.tick count. Not tick, but tick count. There you go. So that is the setup animation states method, where we're basically making sure that the idle animation is going to start at the same time every time. So it's going to basically, well, properly display. And this is going to be called in the tick method. So we're going to override the tick method. We're going to keep the super over here, and we'll say if this.level that is client side, and if this is true, then we want to call the setup animation states method, because the animations, they only need to play on the client. The server doesn't really need to know about anything that has to do with the animations, because they basically just control the model itself, and the model doesn't interact, let's say, physically with anything, right? So in a bit, we're going to actually add a bounding box to this, and that the bounding box itself, that is what's going to then interact with the rest of the world, but the model itself doesn't really interact. So that's the idea. And this sort of thing, right, the setup animation states method, I once again want to urge you to look at some vanilla stuff. So if I were to, let's say, go down here a little bit, and or I would just search for the setup animation states method to go, oh, what is this? Look at this. Yes. So basically, like I said, it's just, I don't know what to tell you. There's a lot of inspiration taken from vanilla, and this is what you have as power when you get to the Java knowledge that is required in order to read some of the vanilla stuff, which, I will be fair, some of it is, it's not that good sometimes, but still. That is the entirety of the Triceratops class done, except for the offspring, which we're going to add after we go in here and actually register it. So this is going to be mod entities class, where we're going to need a public static final. And what is it? Of course, a deferred register of type entity type. So this is entity type of type question mark. It's going to be our entity types over here, equal to a deferred register.create. It's going to be forge registries.entity types, and then tutorial mod.modid. And of course, there's a deferred register, there's a public static void register method. As per usual, though, of course, you can double check the code down below. I actually highly recommend it, because there's a lot of things to still do and still write, and sometimes that is a little bit easier. Then we have, of course, let's actually immediately call this. So there's going to be tutorial mod class inside of the constructor mod entities that register, passing in the mod event bus, and then we can actually proceed here. In the mod entities class, we're going to have a public static final registry object, a registry object of type entity type of type Triceratops entity. It's going to be our Triceratops equal to entity types.register Triceratops. And then this is going to be, the second parameter here is going to be a supplier of an entity type, the class dot builder dot of passing in Triceratops entity : new. And then the second parameter is the mob category of creature. After the first closing parenthesis, we're going to call the sized method, where we're going to put in 1.5f and 1.5f. We probably have to change this, but that's going to be fine. And then after the first closing parenthesis, a build with passing in Triceratops again. And then we can end this with a semicolon, and there we have it. Our Triceratops entity properly registered. Now, the sized, I think that this should be more or less obvious, but maybe not. This is the bounding box that you're going to have. So the bounding box over here is going to have a width of 1.5 and a height of 1.5 as well. Of course, as with any of the numbers, you can always change them, move them about, play around with them a little bit, and then you're basically going to be good to go. With this done, we can move back to the Triceratops entity, and in the get breed offspring method, we can say mod entities.triceratops.get.create, passing in p level, and there we have it. And now the Triceratops entity class is finally done, and we can actually move on to, I mean, I don't want to say bigger and better things, but to other things. And those other things are client stuff. Because here we're going to have the animations, we're going to have the renderer, and we're going to have the model. So in the entity client package, we're going to right click new Java class. First of all, called the Triceratops animations. There we go. Then we're going to add the Triceratops model. And last but certainly not least, Triceratops renderer. There we go. I'm going to start with the animations because this one is actually one of the easier ones. Because this is what we have exported. We have exported a text file that we called Triceratops anims. Now I'm just going to copy all of the contents here over. This should include 3 animations. Of course, when you have this, we simply want to import all of the different classes over here. Nothing too crazy. Move over here, animation definition. And then I also want to change this. I personally like to have the name over here be anim_Triceratops, and then whatever the name is, that's just a personal preference of mine. You do not need to change this if you don't want to. No one is ever going to see that anyway, so it doesn't really matter all that much. I just have to find the other name over here. So this is going to be the idle animation, and then the other one is down here for the walking. Absolutely amazing. And there we have it. Now that we have the animations class set up, so those are all the animation definitions, we can actually close that one. We're going to get to that in a second, but first, the model. The model is another class that we have exported from Blockbench, and that is actually a Java file as well. Now, in this case, I want you to basically copy over everything between the curly brackets and then also paste it properly inside of the curly brackets. It's going to be quite a long thing, but that's going to be fine. You can see we still have the closing curly bracket over here. If I have my caret on here, right, and I go up, you can see that it still selects it, so that is all fine. We're going to delete the comment over here because we don't need it, and then import from top to bottom over here, model layer location. Sometimes if you press, click on something and you alt and enter, and it doesn't, it says create this, absolutely no worries. We literally just delete one of the characters, put it back in, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, this model part that you mean, yes. And then you can go and click on it, press alt and enter to import it. Here in the model layer, of course, it's not a new resource location, but rather a resource location from namespace and path with tutorial.mod.id as its mod ID. This then will be the Triceratops, and the layer is going to be main, which is fine. For the model parts right here, we can delete everything but the body as well as the head. For the name here of the constructor, we want to call this the Triceratops model. And then inside of the constructor, we can remove everything over here. Just got to make sure, yep, that's fine, and that is fine. And there we go. Let's then also do the Triceratops model class definition. The class definition is going to look like this. It's going to be a generic class of type T, which extends from the Triceratops entity. which extends from the hierarchical model of type T. Awesome. We don't need to hover over this because we're going to fix that in a second. Then here, the neck, or rather the head, is gotten via body.getChild upper, and then here .getChild neck, and then getChild head. That is correct. Now you might ask, how do you know where the head is located? Well, let's take a look. So we can see that the base over here is body. Then we're going to go to upper, then we go to neck, and then we have the head. And we need to define the head so that our Triceratops can move its head independently. That's the idea. And that is how this whole thing works. In the create body layer method, we're going to simply import all of the different things: cube deformation, cube list builder over here, part definition, mesh definition, and the layer definition as well. And then at the bottom over here, we can go all the way here, changing the entity to a Triceratops entity. That is going to fix the setup anim method. And then here we want to import the post stack as well as the vertex consumer. We then want to remove all 4 of the floats right here and simply return or use an integer color and then pass that color over here into the render method, which is going to delete, or not delete, but like remove the error in this case. We also want to override the root method, very, very important, where we will return the body. And with that, the general setup is done. We're then going to copy over one method, which is going to be the apply head rotation method. This, as I've said, is literally just going to apply head rotation, right? So when the actual model or the entity looks at a player, of course, it needs to somehow rotate the head, and that is the way that it does it. Then in the setup anim method, we're going to, first of all, copy over the first 2 lines, and I'll explain those. We'll see that those are this root, get all parts for each model part reset pose. What does that mean? This means that we're resetting the position, or the general position of every single model part of our custom model before we do the animations. We need to do this, otherwise all of our animations are going to stack on top of each other and they're going to go out of control. Then we do a head rotation if we need to. That's the idea. And then we also have 2 more lines, which we're going to copy over, which is going to be, this one is the walking over here. So anim Triceratops walking. And you can see this is going to add the walking animation, while this is going to add the idle animation. Once again, if you want to see an example of this, camel, so press shift twice, camel model over here in this case. And if you were to scroll down just a little bit, look at this, animate walk, camel walk, and so on and so forth. Camel animation sit, there's an idle animation, literally everything right here. Like I don't even know, I don't even know what else to say. This is a major thing to note. Always look at vanilla and take a look if you can't find something there. To quickly give an explanation for both the model layer as well as the create body layer right here, the layer location, it's a very weird system here where you basically have sort of a resource location that will combine with the create body layer in just a bit. And the create body layer, this one, right, this like insanely long and crazy freaking looking method, that one is basically the code way to describe this model, right? That is basically what we're doing there, and that is the whole idea. So this is going to be the Triceratops model class done as well. Like I said, the code will be available and is available to you down below, and we can move on to the renderer. Now, the renderer is also quite interesting, as what this is going to do is it's going to extend from the mob renderer class of type Triceratops entity, comma, Triceratops model of type Triceratops entity. Looks absolutely crazy, but funnily enough, this is probably the most complicated part of this entire class. We can hover over this to implement the get texture location method. We can hover over this again, create constructor matching super, and then we want to proceed. And we proceed by, in the constructor itself, we're going to delete the last 2 parameters and just leave the context. Then in the super, the second parameter is going to be a Triceratops model, passing in pcontext.bakeLayer, and then Triceratops model.layer location. And the shadow radius is simply the shadow radius below, which we're going to do a 0.85f. I think that's fine, and that's going to be okay. When it comes to the texture location, we're simply going to return resource location.from namespace and path tutorial.mod.id, and then the location of the texture is going to be textures/entity/triceratops/ triceratops underscore gray.png. And there you have it. So idea being that the name over here is going to be the name of the PNG file that we've also exported from Blockbench. And the texture location here is obviously going to be in our custom assets texture folder. We're going to add that in just a second. The last thing I want to do is I want to override the render method in which we can change the size of our entity. So we're going to say if p_entity.isBaby, then what I want to do is I want to say p_poststack.scale, and let's scale it down, let's say by about half in all directions. And once again, I'm actually unsure if you have to rescale it back up, but I don't think that there's any great harm in this. So what we can simply do is do this over here again. So just basically scale it back to 1, and that should be fine. But it doesn't matter that much. I don't think that we need this, but fair enough. We can keep it like this. And I believe this is going to be it for the 3 main classes, so to speak. We have the entity class, we have the model class, we have the renderer class. Those 3 are the big ones. And now, of course, we need to somehow combine all of those together, because you can see the renderer is nowhere used. The model, like the create body layer method, is nowhere used. So how does that work? Well, it works with some events. So in the event package, we're going to make a new Java class called the mod event bus events. There we go. And on top of the class, we're going to have an annotation. This is going to be the add mod, or rather the add event bus subscriber. So we're going to do this, and you can see it's add mod.eventBusSubscriber. Inside of parentheses, we're going to say mod ID is equal to tutorial mod.modID, comma bus is equal to the mod bus. So bus.mod, and you can see that it uses the mod.eventBusSubscriber class over here to fill this out. So this is how it has to be set up. Very important. And the rest here needs to be pretty much the same as well. So we're going to have a public static void method called register layers with the entity renderers event. So renderers event dot register layer definitions. So you can see this is the event that we need. And above the method, we want the @subscribe event annotation. All of this has to be exactly like this. Subscribe event, public static void, have the register layer definitions class here as the event parameter. And then inside, we can do event.register layer definitions. We're going to say triceratops model.layer location, triceratops model : create body layer. No errors should be present, and there we go. You can, of course, once again, double check this in the description below. There's a GitHub repository for you to check out all of the code, and there we have it. Then we can do a public static void register attributes method, attributes, with the entity attribute creation event. We're going to call this event again, and once more, @subscribe event annotation above it, very important. And then you're going to say event.put mod entities.triceratops.get. And the second line, or the second parameter rather, is the triceratops entity that create attributes.build. And with this, the mod event bus events for now are correct and done. And we can move on once again to the tutorial mod class, where at the very bottom here in the client mod events, inside of our FML client setup, we're going to call entity renderers.register, passing in mod entities.triceratops.get. And the second parameter here is the triceratops renderer : new. Note that it has to be the renderer, and here the triceratops, and then there you go. This now combines all of the things together, so everything is coherent, and in theory, we can already spawn our triceratops inside of the world. However, I mean, that would be a little bit boring, because the first thing we then do as well is how do we spawn it exactly with a custom spawn egg. So let's go into our mod items class and actually add the spawn egg here too. So public static final registry object of type item. This is going to be the triceratops underscore spawn underscore egg equal to the items.register method. I'm going to call this the triceratops underscore spawn underscore egg. Second parameter here is a supplier of a new forge spawn egg item. First parameter being the mod entities triceratops. And then the second and third parameter is the background and highlight color. Now, if I recall correctly, I should already have properly chosen both of those colors. Those are obviously in hex code here. This is going to be like that. And then the last one here is new item properties, for which we need to add nothing. So those are obviously hex, right? So this is RGB over here. So basically you put two of those together and then you get a number between 0 and 255, and that basically is the RGB value of the colors. For this, we need to add it to the creative mode tab. So we're going to add the spawn egg right here. And then in the data gen, to actually properly generate the model file, you might say, oh, this is probably going to be crazy again. Luckily, this is one of the few ones which is really simple, and that is simply going to look like this. It's going to be the with existing parent method, adding the Triceratops spawn egg, get ID, get path, and then an MC lock here of item/template underscore spawn underscore egg, which is going to be filled in with the colors that we have defined right here. That is pretty awesome, and that is the spawn egg added as well. In terms of code, we now have added everything we're going to need, so we can move on to the assets with, first of all, the translation. So in the translation, I obviously want the spawn egg right here. That should be fairly self-explanatory, but I want one more thing at the very bottom over here, and that is going to be entity.tutorialmod.triceratops. There we go, and this is going to be Triceratops. You want to add this because if you have a mod that basically displays the name of the entity, if you hover over it, then it would be properly, basically translated, and that is usually a thing you want. With that, we can then add the texture, and this is going to be the entity texture. So textures, entity, we want a new folder over here. I'm going to call this Triceratops. This is where the Triceratops underscore gray PNG goes. There we have it, and there we go. Also note, please, that this is the American spelling of gray, just so you're aware, because that is a very, very easy typo to make, where you just write it with an E. So just keep that in mind. It is Gray. So if you want to change this, of course, I mean, do I need to tell you the obvious that you can literally just change this one right here? I think at this point, it should become very clear that, oh, of course, this is literally just what this refers to. But there you have it. We have the texture added. We have the assets added. So we have it all connected via the client. We have the spawn egg, and we have the entity properly added with some stuff. So now I feel pretty confident that we have everything. So in this case, the last thing to do is to run data gen to generate our item model JSON file over here, our singular one for the spawn egg. And once that is done, well, I would say, let's jump into the game and see if it works. Well, would you look at that? Of course, you get an error if you write next instead of neck. I think this is just my quick fingers, because how often do you type neck? I mean, listen, okay, I don't know what you kinks you have, but I'm just saying, like, next is a thing that I type a little bit more often. But of course, if you get something like this, never worry about it. Errors always can occur. That is a normal process of programming. Literally, it is designed for you to get errors, and then you can literally just see, hey, the line was 23, and it even says, I cannot find the part called next. And of course, it is called neck. Some of you might have already noticed this before, but that's fine. And now we can jump into the game and see if it works. All right, friends, I'm back in Minecraft. And as you can see, the Triceratops spawning has added, and let's take a look, and you can see, I mean, come on, look at him. Look at this guy. Look at this guy. He's even going to look at me. Come on. Come on, turn your head. Come on, look at me. Well, there you go. But yeah, let's take a look at the model, or rather the boundaries. I think the bounding box is fine overall. I think you can maybe add a little bit more width to it overall, but I think that the height is definitely going to be okay. And there you have it. That is a custom entity added to Minecraft. Awesome. Of course, this was quite an involved process, as I have said, but I really recommend you go through it very carefully. Maybe you have to rewatch a couple of parts. That's totally fine. As per usual, the code is available to you down below, but that's going to be it for this tutorial right here. Next time in this video, we'll also add variants to our Triceratops. Hope to see you there. So, yeah.